I grew up in the countryside of Kyushu. We had a pretty old house. It had been in my father's side of the family for more years than I can trace back. It was pretty big and full of history. I had always thought that if the walls of our house could speak, then they would tell some pretty interesting stories, if you know what I mean. I mean, a lot must have happened on that plot of land. So the day that this experience took place was an extraordinarily ordinary day. We had dinner as a family, like always, as it was a weekday. I took my bath, and then marched up the wooden stairs to bed. Naturally, we slept on the second floor, like I'm assuming most of you do. One thing that might be a little different is that my grandparents lived with us. The only thing was that my grandparents lived downstairs, since they began to find climbing the stairs a bit difficult as they got older. That night my dad didn't come home. He was out late, but I guess that wasn't that abnormal since he seemed to want to work all the hours the Lord sent him. I was about, 4 or 5 when this happened? My mother still read me a story before bed at that age. I'm guessing that you might think that it must be difficult to recall memories of that age, right? But if this happened to you, I can guarantee you that you'd remember this. So there I was, sat on my mother's lap while she was reading me a story. I was staring at the picture book, and then the room went black. I didn't know it at the time, but there had been a power cut. Since we lived in the countryside, there wasn't much available light in our area. What I mean by that is, when I grew up, I realized that there were literally no streetlights around us. Our neighbors were a stone's throw away, not exactly next door. I followed my mum to look out of the bedroom window, and we saw nothing but darkness staring back at us. I guess that was to be expected since it was the countryside. I remember that the power outage lasted a long time. I got into bed at my mother's request, and I just laid there in the dark, expecting her to come back and finish her story, not realizing that she was probably frantically trying to get the power back on. It was in those moments in the dark, alone upstairs, that the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me occurred. I was fully stretched out in my bed, and my hand must have been just lingering outside of the blanket. And I felt something. I distinctly remember feeling something brush against my fingers, despite knowing that I was the only one in the room. The contact I felt was undoubtedly human. I was touched by a human hand. It didn't grab or pull or anything like that, it just gently caressed my fingers. The fingers I had left exposed outside of the blankets. I lay there horrified in the dark. I instantly retracted my hand back into the safety of the blankets. But after that, I felt as if I shouldn't move. I felt so alone in the dark. I could hear my mother moving around downstairs, but I didn't have the courage to call her. I didn't want the hand to come back and touch me. I remember thinking that exact thought. I don't know how long had passed, but eventually the lights flickered and came back on. The picture book that my mother had been reading me was now at the foot of the bed, and there was no one else in the room but me. My mother came back upstairs smiling. She was relieved that the power was on, no doubt. Still, I had no idea what happened in the bedroom when I was supposed to be alone. If it wasn't my mother's hand, then it couldn't have been anybody else's. Like I said, my grandparents lived downstairs, and with a house as old as ours, I would have heard some creaking coming up the wooden stairs. My grandparents, they weren't exactly nimble. To this day, I have no idea who the owner of that hand was or what it meant. Sometimes I like to think that it was a family member who once lived in our house, but other times I wonder if it was something using the darkness to try and guide me away. Either way, it was pretty scary. This is a really strange experience I had back when I was in high school. Back in those days, I was a member of the school's brass band, and we regularly held band practice after school. Sometimes our practice sessions went on until it was quite late. I lived quite some way from my high school. My parents were adamant that I get into that school specifically because it was supposed to be the best in the area. I used to commute to school by train, but since I lived in the countryside, there wasn't that many regular trains back to my station. So what became quite a regular routine for me would be to wait in the practice room until my train came in. When tournaments and concerts were coming up, there would usually be other band members staying as late as I did. During those times, the practice room was pretty lively, and it was never a bother to wait there until my train arrived. However, when we have no concerts or events to prepare for, my bandmates tend to leave earlier. I can't blame them. I would have left earlier if I could have. This meant that in this off-season period, I would be the person who would be in charge of locking up the practice room before going home. The practice room was located at the far end of my high school's grounds. It stood in the shadow of a tall mountain, making it cool enough to practice in the summer, but very eerie in the darker seasons at night. So anyways, now that I've kind of set the scene, I will tell you what makes this experience scary. It was late autumn, and we had no concerts coming up. So my bandmates left after practice, and I stayed in the practice room alone as usual. Something was a little different about that day though. My parents had decided to come and pick me up, which made a nice change. I was sitting in the drum chair in the corner of the room, and I was sorting out the sheet music, and that's when I heard a knock at the door. I looked through the glass panel, and even though it was dark, I recognized that it was my mum's silhouette out there. I called out to her that I was coming, and I saw her head back off to the car. I got ready to leave. I picked up my school bag and stuffed the music sheets in there. I then turned off the light and opened the door. I gave my mum a wave and then closed and locked the door. I ran over to the car and got in. I was greeted by a look of confusion on my mother's face. I didn't know what the problem was, but then she asked me something. "Are you sure you want to lock that door?" It was my turn to be confused now because I didn't know why she said that. So I asked, "Yeah, of course. Why?" "Oh, okay. I guess that girl has a key then. She can get out, can't she?" I felt a shudder run between my shoulder blades. I was alone in there. I was definitely the only one in the practice room. There could not have been anyone else in that room but me. I told my mum that there was no one in there, and I asked her if we could get moving. I wanted to get away from there. Now she is adamant that she saw a girl in there. I wonder if something happened in the past in that band practice room. I never felt the same about being alone in there again after my mother saw the girl. I decided I would wait in a different part of the school for my trains. It was a creepy school memory that makes me wonder if I was ever truly alone in there while I waited. Before I start telling you this, I want you to know that I still don't believe in ghosts. There's only one experience that I've had in my life to this date that has made me question my stance on the paranormal or the beyond or whatever. I have to say that because of this specific experience, I have no right any longer to say that I can completely say that there is no existence of the paranormal. But anyways, you'll soon understand what I mean if you stick with this story for a moment. This happened when I was in the first grade. I was really young. Now, I don't remember all that much about what happened before everything popped off, but it happened when I came home from school one afternoon and I took a nap. I guess that I must not have had a decent night's sleep the night before, because as soon as I laid down on my bed after school, it was like lights out. I say bed, but I want you to imagine a non-conventional bed. It all boils down to the blanket, duvet, quilt, or whatever you know it as. Anyways, I didn't have the thickest blanket on my bed. It was so flimsy that I might as well be calling it sheets. When I woke up from my after-school nap, it was dark. I thought it was night, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't think that my mum would have let me sleep through dinner, so I guessed it wasn't that late. The light in my bedroom was still on when I woke up. I could see it through that thin blanket I mentioned earlier. I was groggy, but just as I was about to get on my feet and go see my family, I felt an intense pressure bearing down on me. A couple of shadows fell on top of the bed. I quickly identified that there was 4 hands. I could see them pretty clearly from within my blanket barrier because I had left that bedroom light on. 2 large hands and 2 small. I saw them. These hands landed on my blanket and essentially me, and began to push, grounding me down with my back flat against the mattress. At the time, there would have been only me, my little brother, and my mum at home. My dad wouldn't have come back from work yet, so I had no doubt that the shadows and the hands I felt on me belonged to my mum and my brother. I figured that they must have just decided to play a prank on me. My younger brother has always been a bit of a handful. It started off seemingly pretty playful, but quickly I felt more and more pressure being applied. I couldn't move. I was trying to fight against their hands, but I didn't have the strength. I wanted to get my hands out from under the blanket, but I couldn't. The bedding on top of me felt as if it was vacuum sealing me to the bed. It was making it difficult to breathe. It was covering my mouth. I didn't like this prank. I managed to turn my head to the side and shout, let me out, again and again. My mum and my brother didn't say anything though, they just kept pushing their weight down on me. It was becoming incredibly painful. I couldn't take much more of it. And just when I thought that I was about to run out of oxygen, the covers were whipped off me. The light blinded me momentarily, but then I heard a very familiar voice. The voice belonged to my little brother. He stood there and asked me, "What's wrong?" I quickly found out that my mum wasn't in the room with us. She was down the hall, in the living room, watching TV. It simply would not have been possible for her to be in 2 places at once. And it wasn't as if the living room was next to my room. It was a good 10-second sprint away from my room. I couldn't understand it. I felt 4 hands holding me down, 2 big hands and 2 small hands. I swear they were similar to my mum and my brother's. However, there was one difference. The fingers felt like they became pointier at the ends. I have never been able to understand what happened that day. I asked my parents if we lived in a haunted house, and they said that we didn't. I've even asked the same question when I was a teenager too, just in case they were trying to hide it from me, in case I got scared as a kid. But again, no. No one else in my family had any other kind of paranormal experiences in that house. I still can't work it out. I even asked my parents about the blanket, the duvet, the covers, but they cannot remember where they got it. I don't know, maybe it was related to that haunted blanket situation. It only ever happened the once though. For me, it's truly unexplainable. Something very strange has been going on lately. It's actually quite scary, but I guess you'll find it more gross than scary. Let me explain. I've been getting a lot of hair in my mouth lately. It seems to always be a really long black strand, most of the time. No one I live with has long black hair. And at first I thought not too much of it. I thought, oh well, a strand of hair must have been attached to my coat, made it into my apartment, things like that. I mean, we've all ended up with a strand of hair in our mouths at one point or another, right? And that's just how it started. For want of a better word, it was intermittent. A strand of hair in my mouth when I woke up from a nap, or in the morning. Most of the time I just got it out of my mouth without thought. But when it started happening a lot more regularly, I simply couldn't accept it as a coincidence anymore. And then I had a dream. Well, nightmare is a little bit more accurate. It's such a vivid and, to be honest, insane dream. In my dream, I'm biting and gnawing at the hair of a woman with long black hair. The woman is clearly in pain, and I feel bad for what I'm doing, yet I cannot resist the compulsion to do it. As I watch myself in this dream, I notice that I'm not just biting at her hair, I'm devouring it. I'm eating her hair. And slowly but surely, I see her being stripped of all her hair. All I can do in this dream is just stare in amazement. Then the woman in the dream suddenly looked at me. It's hard to explain because I'm watching myself. So she looks at me watching myself and says, "Help me. Help me." And she just glares at me with this intense eye contact. And then I wake up to find a strand of hair, maybe a couple, in my mouth. This happened, I'd say, about 3 times before I tried to seek some help. But I mean, what help could I get? I turned to religion. I went to the temple and asked for the priest's opinion. While I was there, I lost consciousness while speaking with the priest. It was the strangest thing. When I came to, the first thing I asked was, "What kind of spirit is it?" I don't know why. Maybe it was something subconscious that came back with me when I opened my eyes. And the priest just said, "You don't want to know. You'll just regret it." And we looked at one another, and it was incredibly tense. He said, "I am very concerned for you, and I want you to take this with you." He handed me this small talisman. It's a kind of charm. I gave a donation to the temple, and I was asked to seriously consider returning back to the temple for the next 7 consecutive days. Well, I did go back, but I gave up after about the 2nd day. It kept away the dreams, though, for a while. But now, I've started to have the hair dreams again. This is the first time that I have wanted to share a personal experience with anyone outside of my friends and family. It will probably be my last. I would call myself an ordinary person. I haven't ever had a paranormal experience other than this one. This happened when I was in junior high school. My family were living in an apartment complex at the time. My bedroom faced the communal hallway, so I always saw people passing. In the gap beneath the door, I could see their shadows. I was going into high school in the following semester, so I had to study for the entrance exams. This was right around summer vacation time, and it's a common thing here in Japan. It was late. I was under pressure. I didn't want to fail my exams. It was later than I thought, though. When I looked at my alarm clock, I was shocked to see that it was already 2:30 a.m. I remember that it was raining heavily outside, and I was thinking of turning in for the night. Then it started. I heard thudding sounds, kind of like the sound of bare feet running on hardwood floors. That sound was quickly followed by muffled laughter. Now the footsteps and the laughter I heard sounded like they belonged to children. It sounded like kids were skipping. And it sounded like these noises were coming from outside of our apartment and down the hall. At first I thought it was just another family in the building who had gone out and were coming back late. It was odd because all I could hear were these kids' footsteps and them laughing. I was thinking I was about to hear the parents reprimand them for being so loud so late in our communal building. But I didn't. I turned off the lights in my room and I got into bed thinking that they'll shut up in a minute. Thinking back on it now, when I turned the lights off and got into bed, I think that that was a conscious decision to avoid the noises that I was hearing. It was like I didn't want them to be aware that I was still awake, and I don't know why I felt that way. They kept running up and down and laughing out there in the hall, only this time something was slightly different. The noises of those children sounded like they were approaching our front door. Why wasn't I hearing these kids' parents? I was thinking this as my eyes were closed and I pulled my blanket up over my shoulders. I kept my eyes shut and I waited for the children outside to pass by our front door. The footsteps came closer and closer. They sounded like they were right outside my neighbor's door. I screwed my eyes shut and just hoped they'd go away, still wondering why no one had come out to tell them to shut up. I knew something seriously strange was going on at that point. My heart was beating like a drum in my chest. I told myself over and over that they'd go away soon. Then, as if to answer my prayers, there was silence. Not a good silence, though. Just before things went quiet, I heard children's footsteps and laughter stop right in front of our front door, as if they had picked the door they wanted to visit. The unpleasant silence reigned over our dark home. The owner of those footsteps and the laughter was right outside. Then something terrifying happened. I heard the sound of 2 footsteps coming from inside our home, right outside my bedroom door. I left my bedroom door ajar every night. Ironically, I used to be scared to sleep with the door shut. And through the gap in the door, I felt as if something was gazing at me. I was scared to look towards the door, but I was incredibly curious to see if anyone was out there. I slept with my feet facing the door, so all I needed to do was to open my eyes and I'd see if anyone was there or not. I decided to brave it, but then my body resisted me. I couldn't move a muscle. It felt as if my body was a stone. It was just motionless. I didn't know what to do because I hadn't ever experienced anything like that before. It sounds like it could have been sleep paralysis, though. I tried to get a hold of myself. I told myself if I opened my eyes, I'd see that there's no one there and that I could get to sleep. I think that I couldn't make myself believe that, though, because it didn't work. I was trapped in my own body until I saw the light of morning against my closed eyes, and then my alarm went off. That seemed to snap me back to reality. I was once again back in control of my body. I opened my eyes and I saw that there was no one there. My bedroom door was wide open, though, but I guess that my mum could have done that. I don't think so, though. She never normally did. When I realized that it was safe, I jumped out of my bed and I ran to Mum. I told her about what happened that night. My mum didn't say much about it, though. She said something like, "It's common for a child your age to have bad dreams now and then." She clearly didn't believe what I had told her. I don't know if something happened in our apartment complex in the past, or if I was just visited by some kind of wandering spirits. I have no clue because I don't really know much about the paranormal. But it was really scary for me, and as you might expect, I never slept with the door open again. Sometimes, though, I can still feel the stare of something unknown on me at night. This is my father's story, but he has given me his permission to share it. Sadly, my father was diagnosed with colon cancer about 10 years ago. Fortunately, they diagnosed it early on, and it only had affected a small portion of his large intestine, so the doctor said that they could remove it. That being said, it was still a major surgery, and I imagined he was worried if he might die. He never said anything because he's always been a very calm person, but I think it would have been playing on his mind. He needn't have worried though, because the surgery was a complete success. My father spent some time in hospital recovering from the surgery. During the time he spent in there, during that time, he said he was swimming in and out of consciousness in his hospital bed, and that was when he experienced something. He said he felt the presence of someone by the side of his bed. He said he could even sense it when he was sleeping. He said that that presence seemed to be worried for my father as it watched, and this presence would be clearer in his dreams. He said that it was a person, and it would look down at him for a while and then leave with a nurse. He just thought it was my mum, his wife, coming to see him while he drifted in and out of consciousness. Since he thought it was her, he wasn't scared of the presence. When he sensed that presence, my dad was curious to see what time it was. So, as he woke up, he reached over and grabbed his digital watch and was surprised to see that it was just after 2 a.m. Now, he thought visiting times were around noon and wondered why his wife was coming to see him so late at night. He said he fell back asleep while that thought lingered in his mind in the dark and quiet hospital ward. The next day when he woke up, he said he was feeling a lot better and able to think a little more clearly when my mum and I came to see him. And he asked her why she came to see him so late. Well, of course, we looked at Dad and thought, what the hell are you on about? Then we proceeded to tell him that it couldn't have possibly been Mum, as we were both at home in bed. Plus, the hospital didn't allow visits that late anyway. That made my dad remember something. He said that, come to think of it, the nurse's uniform did look a bit different to the others on the ward. He said that the nurse's hat or cap, sorry, I don't know the right terminology, was a bit oversized and baggy, kind of how they used to look in the past. There was also something else that he realized. There was something wrong with the direction that the presence came from. He slept on his shoulder facing the left, something that he's always done. He said that the presence came to him from that direction, and that couldn't be possible because there was a wall stood there. It was like the layout of the ward was different in his dream. When he realized all of these things, he said he instantly thought of someone. He thought of his mother, my grandma. Sadly, she passed away when he was in high school. She actually passed on in the same hospital that he had been admitted to. According to my father's memory, the ward she was on was the ward he was recovering in. He says that he strongly believes that. I guess that it could have looked the same. It's hard to trust the testimony of a junior high school student. Sorry, I sound a little bit strict there, don't I? However, at the time I was a little bit more sentimental, and I turned to my father in his bed and I said, "Maybe your mother came to see you because she was worried about you, Dad." My father smiled and looked happier than I had seen him in the last few days after I said that. He hasn't ever been the type to believe in the paranormal, but that touching experience he had in that hospital ward, I think has quietly turned him into a believer. By the way, one little afterthought from me here. If that truly was the ward that his mother passed away in, can you imagine how scared and concerned he must have been when he was admitted? I'm glad a presence came to visit him, to watch over him.